Hey, everybody, welcome to Arbitrary and Capricious. I'm your host, Jay Reed, alongside my co host, Aaron Robinson, coming,
Heyo.
coming to you on Monday, March the 19th of 2018. How you been doing, Aaron?
Doing good now that we have gotten all of our technical problems resolved. This is actually episode 4.2. We're coming to you on Monday because we had a little bit of a technical difficulty yesterday, but we've got all the kinks worked out, so we're running strong.
Yeah, we appreciate you for hanging with us, and we hope to bring you solid up today.
Very good. Now, today we're going to be talking about some really interesting topics. I'm bringing to the table the constant revolving door of employment at the White House and the most notorious acronym in American history, the CIA. And Jay, what have you got on the table for us?
Well, today I wanted to do a little bit more of a discussion and pose the question, can you still enjoy House of Cards? Meaning, once an artist has been revealed to be a bad person or somebody who's done some bad things, uh, is it acceptable to, or should it be acceptable to continue to enjoy that art?
And honestly, I think that this is a question that we can kind of look back in history because we've known that a lot of artists have been terrible people throughout time. So it's not just limited to the current climate of the Me Too movement either.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm hoping to get into today. But before we get to that, got any old business?
I don't think that I think that nothing has really developed on the Korean front other
Hmm.
than maybe move the meeting, and I think it's going to happen in Geneva instead of on the border between South and North Korea now. So those are the only developments there. What about you?
Well, I want to briefly touch on the basketball scandal we talked about a couple weeks ago, because March Madness is in full swing. It started on Thursday in earnest. And one of the expected outcomes from the scandal was they thought that there were going to be some suspensions to the players caught up in this scandal, or maybe some punishment to the schools involved. And so far, zip, nada, nothing. So I guess once again, no news there. And I wanted to also touch on the tariffs from last week. It's come out over the last week that they've actually granted some exceptions to these tariffs, most importantly to some of our biggest allies, people like Canada and Australia. So, what some commentators are speculating is that these tariffs really aren't about the steel or the aluminum at all. It's just a bargaining trip from the Trump administration. So, maybe we all jumped the gun a little bit, and I count myself included in that.
Well, we'll have to see how China responds, but I do find it an interesting move to provide waivers because at that point, it's not really a tariff anymore. It's
Mhm.
not really doing what it's supposed to do. Not that tariffs are ever a good decision, but it's not really protecting, domestic production at that level. So, but as we discussed last time, we don't really need to protect domestic production since we use more than we can produce.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see where this goes. We'll keep tracking it for you.
Well, very good. Well, let's go ahead and get into these topics because I'm pretty excited to talk about this. As we've seen, this administration has had kind of a problem with employment. Just I think maybe a week ago, um, Gary Cohn stepped down because of the tariffs, and then the White House communications director Hope Hicks resigned after Trump, I think, said something mean to her. I'm not quite sure what transpired there, but everyone's been speculating.
He said
Needless to
something
say,
mean to her? Is
I
that what you
believe
said?
that's what one of the things that
Huh.
I saw was that she resigned after something mean was said, or at least that was
Mm.
the statement that was given. But needless to say, in the first year and 50 days of Donald Trump's presidency, he's had a higher turnover rate than both Obama and Bush's first 2 years. So things aren't looking great. In addition to that, Trump has fired something like 35 cabinet members and major administrative figures in his administration, and 47 U.S. attorneys that were appointed by Obama. Um, so we have something like 256 unfilled positions that have never been nominated. He's firing people left and right. We have an inept administration, not because of decision making, just because of lack of people. We saw how, when we were talking about Korea, the lack of an ambassador kind of screwed up the chain of communication between South Korea and the United States. and kind of turned it into a circus, to where Trump's having a press conference just so that he can brag about what the South Koreans are bringing to the table. So with these problems, we see that it doesn't seem like anything's changing, and in fact, things are continuing down this route. Trump just recently fired our Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Now, I'm going to be honest, wasn't a big fan of the guy in the first place. Former CEO of ExxonMobil, not who I would want as our Secretary of State dealing with our international affairs. But needless to say, apparently he didn't always get along with Trump either, and kind of wanted to run the Secretary of State's job his own way without much interference from Trump, which is where a lot of the friction developed. Now, with the firing of Rex Tillerson, we have a very interesting development. We have the nomination of Mike Pompeo, who is the current CIA director, to replace Tillerson. Now, before we move on to that real fast, I want to say one thing. I do have to give props to Tillerson, because in his resignation speech, he thanked everyone he worked with except for Trump, which, you know, when you get fired in a tweet, I feel like you're entitled to some type of backhanded, passive-aggressive conduct. So kudos to you, Tillerson. You can go retire in peace now.
Right. And he was told to expect the tweet, right? Like that was how he got the news.
Yeah, so I believe that the morning of, he was told, or maybe the night before, Kelly called him, and Kelly, is the chief of staff for the president, calls up Tillerson and says, hey, come back to the United States and expect a tweet. So he may not have known exactly what was happening, but since enough people have been terminated via Twitter at this point, I think he could probably assume. But again, this gets back to just a complete lack of decorum with the Trump White House, a lack of using the proper channels of communication, a lack of using the institutions and infrastructure that we've had in place for a long time. So it just doesn't look very professional or presidential at the end of the day.
How is it that a person whose catchphrase is "you're fired," but he doesn't fire people to their face?
That's a good question. Like, I feel like that's the one thing he would enjoy about the job, is like bringing them in, sitting them down, getting them all nervous, and being like, "You did a bad job, you're fired." But no, he does it over Twitter. It's almost like he's afraid to face these people, and it's really, really sad that this is what the office of the president has been reduced to at this point. But I mean, we also saw that the federal courts have been citing to his Twitter account in regards to statements made by the president for interpretation purposes. I thought that was really interesting. Like, whenever his lawyers were saying, well, the Muslim ban's not really a Muslim ban, and the courts were like, well, we saw on Twitter that he said it was. So kind of a double-edged sword there.
Well, do you think it's almost like you can go to Twitter for Trump's legislative intent?
I think so. It's almost like we have his, I don't know if it's a legislative intent or executive branch intent, but sure. Yeah, we get to see behind the curtain, unfortunately, a little too much. And I think that ultimately hurts him, at the end of the day, regarding whether or not he can do something constitutionally or if it's permissible. I think he shoots himself in the foot too much there. But anyways, back to Mike Pompeo, because this is the guy that is a little concerning. Mike Pompeo, the current CIA director, is a former Tea Party congressman from Kansas. He has only had the job since the beginning of 2017, so he's a Trump nominee. But some of his stances are just absolutely awful. I mean, he thinks that Congress should pass laws reestablishing collection of metadata and combining it with a publicly available finance and lifestyle information into a comprehensive searchable database. Essentially, he wants to create data mining on everybody in America, foreign and domestic, and create a database so that we can essentially track what everybody's likes, wants, purchases, lifestyles are. I mean, this is a massive invasion into everyone's privacy. The Fourth Amendment would never allow such a thing. But this is the person who is now being appointed to Secretary of State.
Well, hold on one second. I want to come back to the data mining. But first, I want to say, I thought we were done with the Tea Party, man.
You
Like
thought we
I
were done with the Tea Party?
like I thought we left 2009 in the past. I thought we had moved on from the Tea Party and we'd forgotten about Occupy Wall Street, and we'd moved on to bigger and worse things.
I don't think I
Uh,
can ever forget the Tea Party. And I would say like 2012 was like the pinnacle of the Tea
right.
Party, 2009 up to 2012. And what happened is what happens all the time when a third party or a fraction of the electorate kind of shifts a different direction, is that one of the two big parties ate it. Okay, so the Tea Party was essentially just absorbed into the Republican Party, which is what happened when the Green Party got all about the environment. The Democrats absorbed that faction, and this is usually how we keep our two-party system. Is that whenever something gets big enough to warrant its own party, one of the two factions just kind of brings it into the fold. So yes, you're right in that regards. They're not a standalone party, but their political influence, the Freedom Caucus, shifting the Republican Party hard to the right, opening it up for the alt-right to kind of get a foothold. I think all these are still tied to the Tea Party, in my personal opinion. But so I just wanted to give a little background on this guy. He is from the Tea Party movement. And so that kind of frames, I guess, what I would say his character and mindset might be in doing this kind of job. I mean, I apologize.
Come on, man. You're breaking the pod rules.
I did. I forgot to switch my phone on silent. So
You're going to have to spend a minute in the pod penalty box.
I will take my 30 lashes for not silencing my phone.
All right. So this Pompeo guy. So
the other things I want to touch on real quickly, especially since he's coming from the CIA and going into the State House, essentially, or the State Office, not State House. That's the Senate. But he's he supports Guantanamo Bay. He doesn't think that we should close it. He criticized Obama's decision to end secret prisons and the requirement that all of our interrogators adhere to anti-torture laws. That, to me, is really concerning, especially as he's the leader of the CIA. He said that the North Korean regime should be replaced. It's not just enough to denuclearize the peninsula, that they need to end the regime of the Kim family.
Well, that's the message we need to send right now.
Exactly, right when we're starting negotiations. The guy who's going to be heading up the negotiations has previously said we should just take out the entire regime. So this is definitely the right, smart decision to go with Trump. Furthermore, he stated that Russia has reasserted itself aggressively, invading, occupying countries like Ukraine, threatening Europe, and doing nearly nothing to aid in the destruction and defeat of ISIS. So at least he sees that Russia's not a good guy. So that's, I guess, one point towards him. But honestly, at this point, is anyone thinking, other than Trump, that Russia and Putin are good guys?
No.
And I think the last thing I wanted to bring up is that, here it is. He said that there are scientists who think a lot of different things about climate change. There are those who think that it's warming, some think it's cooling. There's some think that the last 16 years have shown a pretty stable climate environment. So this guy, pretty hard to the right, anti-climate change, anti any social stuff that's homosexual agenda or abortion or anything like that. So he's a hardcore Tea Partier, and his stance on international diplomacy apparently is just take him out. So this is who we're nominating to take over for Tillerson. And honestly, outside of just wanting to come off as a tough negotiator, why appoint this guy? Is it just because he thinks that the Kim regime should be replaced? Is that the reason? Is he trying to put pressure on the North Koreans in the negotiation just by using this guy?
Well, maybe this will show my ignorance, but do you think that in his capacity as the head of the CIA, he has gained foreign policy experience? Is that even a part of the CIA director's job?
Well, the CIA only operates outside the United States.
Yeah, but when was the last time that you saw him shaking hands with the president of France?
This is true. Like, lack of diplomacy. You're right. A black ops is not the same as a diplomatic mission. And I'd also raise the point that he's only been in the CIA for 12 months, 13 months. He has a year of experience as the head of the CIA. And before that, he was a congressman, a House of Representative member from the 4th Congressional District. And he held that position for 6 years. So, and it says that here his background is just as a businessman. So no, I don't think that he has the international skills and acumen to actually pull this off. I think this is more smoke and mirrors from Trump. You know,
Well, hey, he's an outsider, and we're all about the outsiders now, right?
I mean, I thought it was the swamp. We wanted to be outside the swamp. This doesn't look like it's any better than the swamp that we've been living in. So,
Mm.
and also, I thought we made some progress under the Obama administration, getting rid of the advanced interrogation techniques. So this actually seems kind of like we're going backwards with these kind of people.
Well, speaking of the enhanced interrogation techniques, what is the situation for replacing him at the CIA?
So that's a perfect segue because it's the deputy of the CIA. Sorry, Gina Haspel. I'm never gonna be able to pronounce her name right. I keep thinking the P and the S should be switched. She is a former chief of the CIA who ran black sites post 9/11, including one in Thailand where she's been accused of destroying tapes that recorded the torture that took place on site. So not only is she accused of, essentially allowing this to happen, but also covering it up.
So she's Nixon.
She's the CIA Nixon.
Yeah.
And I mean, at least a few people are starting to point out, hey, this person's not a great candidate for this job. In fact, and I don't like this congressman at all, but I'm going to give him props. Rand Paul even said, hey, I'm going to filibuster both of these guys, Pompeo and Haspel, because they're not fit for this job. So hopefully over the next couple of weeks, more and more stuff comes out. Hopefully that at the confirmation hearings, they run them through the ringer, because there needs to be a much better option than either one of these people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it definitely feels like we're taking a step back towards like brutishness and, our baser human attributes instead of going towards what I feel like our founding fathers and America really stands for,
Oh, absolutely. I think the Guantanamo Bay, torture in general, and our drone policy are the most negative things about our reputation abroad right now. I think those are the three things that are really leading public opinion against us.
I would agree. And it's really bad whenever drone strikes are so, like, I want to say relevant, but so frequent in your country that drones are being used in commercials to sell you things.
Mm-hmm.
I think in Pakistan there was like an animated drone mascot for some store. So that's pretty bad,
Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit of a tangent, but there have been drone strikes against U.S. citizens abroad, which is against the Constitution in every manner. But getting back to the CIA, it is inconceivable to me that they would bring on somebody who is ostensibly going to expand torture. That's just going backwards.
Well, and the fact that the person who's been in charge of it for the last 13 months says that we need to get rid of this order from Obama to use non-torture techniques. I mean, what has the CIA been doing for the last 13 months? That's my next question.
Mm-hmm. Well, wasn't this a campaign promise from Trump that we were going to be tougher on suspected terrorists and we were going to bring back the enhanced interrogation techniques?
This is not. You're right. He did say things like that, but at the end of the day, what trumps Trump? A campaign promise or the Constitution? And I feel like,
oh, absolutely.
I feel like all of us, like after the end of the Bush administration, were like, yeah, waterboarding's torture.
Right, but we both know that Trump is not going to let the Constitution stop him from doing anything.
This is true.
So let's just imagine that this really is something that he values and cares about, and he decides that he's going to implement a policy of increased interrogation techniques. Do you think he's going to hold a press conference for it, or do you think he's just going to put people in place who are going to take care of it?
I think a bit of both. I don't think he can ever let go of the showman aspect of his personality. I mean, after, and I'm just going to say this, like over the weekend, they, sorry, Attorney General Sessions fired Andrew McCabe, who was the deputy director of the FBI. 3 months before that, Trump like tweets that McCabe only has 90 days until he retires. I don't think he's going to make it. And then after he gets fired by Sessions, Trump declares victory and says that McCabe has been fired. This is a victory for democracy everywhere. So he can't keep his mouth shut. He can't keep his fingers off the keyboard. So even if his goal was to bring back enhanced torture techniques secretly, I feel like he'd be talking about it. I feel like he would do it, and then he'd go brag about doing it.
You think he's not, or I'm sorry, you think he's so dumb that he would do that he would talk about it publicly?
He bragged about making up facts in a meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister at a Missouri fundraiser. Yes, I think he's that dumb.
I keep trying to give him credit, and he just keeps giving that credit right back.
This is true.
Oh, man. But to talk about Guantanamo Bay, that's just another, I think, stain on America. I think that is an objectively horrible thing that the rest of the world can continue to point to. Whenever we get on our high horse about human rights violations, they can just spit that right back at us.
And as we saw during the Obama administration, when he tried to address it, there's not a real good way to address it. The military doesn't follow the constitutional, restrictions on the police when arresting someone. This is war. This is a policing action in a foreign country. Those were air quotes if you didn't see them. And, so these guys didn't get their Miranda rights. They didn't have any of the procedural safeguards that the Constitution requires. So if they get tried in a Article 3 federal court, they're going free. Mm-hmm. Even if they did it, they're going free. And that's what Obama realized, and why he even backed away from Guantanamo. Was like, I want the next guy to figure this out, because there wasn't a good solution. There still isn't.
Right.
And do you want to be the president that had to release an entire jail full of suspected terrorists?
Of course, but what's the alternative? Do we just let them die now? Wait for them to.
I'm not advocating for that, but I'm saying, like, I feel like that's the decision that the United States has made, is that it's either don't add any more to Guantanamo and let those who are there like drift into non-existence and fade from memory, or just, I don't know. You can't let them go. Like that's the problem that Obama found himself at. Mm-hmm. How do you propose we solve this? It's hard, right?
If the smartest minds in the world haven't come up with a solution, I'm certainly not going to. No. But it's an issue that stings me.
It's an issue that stings. And honestly, I'm a little disappointed in the Supreme Court for continuing to punt on this, because they're the ones who need to make this decision. They're the ones who either needs to say, look, you can do it or you can't. Mm-hmm. And this does raise, and I know we're way down the rabbit trail here, but this does raise one issue that I've talked about for a while, and it's the fact that the Geneva Convention has some holes in it. Mm-hmm. The Geneva Convention limits the way that two states can go at it when they're at war. It has rules for prisoners of war, for negotiations, all this different stuff. Certain weapons you can't use, certain techniques. And so the reason why we're even able to use waterboarding or advanced, interrogation techniques is because we're not fighting a state. We're once again fighting these, ragtag groups of insurgents, and they don't represent a flag or anything like that. So the Geneva Convention doesn't apply. Additionally, the Geneva Convention doesn't address cyber warfare. I think what we're really seeing is we need to address the Geneva Convention.
I think you're right about that, but let me ask you a question about torture then.
Okay.
So do you think that, and I could just be ignorant about this as well, but do you think that the popularity of torture, you could say, increased after 9/11? Like, were we waterboarding people in the 90s?
No, I definitely think it was one of those things because it's kind of like the Nazis rebranding themselves as the alt-right. Is waterboarding is just like a rebranding of the word torture, or enhanced interrogation techniques is just a rebranding of torture. And so I think that we've probably always done shady stuff on black sites. I mean, I have a hard time believing that when the KGB was as notorious as they were, that we were not equally as notorious. I'm pretty sure the CIA tried to overthrow like Greece or something at some point in its history. So,
And every South American
and every
government.
South American government. So let's not forget about that. But uh, I think that the issue here was that people were afraid. And so, because people were afraid, people were able to get away with a lot more. It's that old adage from Benjamin Franklin, those who are willing to give up their freedom for security deserve neither. That's kind of how I felt, is we were giving up our freedom, our liberty, our conscience, our ethics for the illusion of security in some ways. So I think that's the reason why it was more palatable to Americans for a time. But I don't know, man.
Well, you had mentioned that that Pompeo, the new Secretary of State, was somebody who was in favor of increased surveillance capabilities
Oh yeah.
by the intelligence community. So is this the direction that we're going back in? We're going back towards security and away from freedom?
I think so. And I'm not going to say that the Obama administration was just like super freedom, because the massive NSA facility that records all of the internet was built during the Obama administration. So let's be honest, like that aspect of our society and the government hasn't gone away. Patriot Act didn't fully sunset; they renewed that bitch. So, um, I do agree that yes, waterboarding, the things that like on its surface, when people realized it was torture, we scaled back. But we're still using the FISA courts. We're still using all this stuff that was set up during the Patriot Act. So I don't think that's really changed in our society that much.
And I think that's a shame. I would hope that the aughts would be a cautionary tale.
Mm.
I would hope that we would have learned from our mistakes, but it really, well, the lesson of 2016 is that we haven't.
Yeah. Well, and at the same time, remember what we learned in law school, that the government is going to do what the government can until the Supreme Court says you can't do that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, like we just look back at history. There are decisions that if we were looking at the Constitution today, we'd say that's blatantly a bad decision, Supreme Court. What have you done? Why are you letting the federal government silence the communist? Well, because the Supreme Court wasn't standing up to the federal government yet.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't take First Amendment free speech that seriously yet, and then it shifted, and boom, the Supreme Court started curbing the power of the government. So I think it's really going to take a strong Supreme Court to kind of address some of these issues, and I think that under the guise of national security, they have refrained in a lot of ways from stopping these practices. And maybe that's something as a society we should ask ourselves. Is national security worth our conscience, our ethics, our morality?
Well, you've touched on how important a role the Supreme Court plays in this process in limiting the powers of the federal government when they overreach. So let's talk a little bit about the composition of the Supreme Court then. Does this court bend towards security or freedom?
I think as it stands right now, we're in the same makeup as I'm going to call it the Scalia court, even though it wasn't the Scalia court, but the court when Scalia was on board.
Right.
We're essentially the same makeup until Kennedy and Ginsburg rotate out. I think we won't really know how this makeup has shifted. I mean, honestly, I wasn't expecting Roberts to uphold Obamacare. So,
Right.
I mean, these justices are not always bound by their labels, I think is a good way to say it. They're most of the times, I think, outside of Clarence Thomas, of course, they're trying to get the right decision. Clarence Thomas is just trying to copy paste the best opinion. So and for those of you who don't know, Clarence Thomas is the justice who never asked a question, like ever, since being appointed to the Supreme Court, and whose wife, I believe, works for Monsanto, and he refused to recuse himself in a Monsanto case. So, upstanding guy.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But I think that where we're sitting right now, without Scalia and without knowing enough about Gorsuch, I think we're kind of at a stalemate. It's going to be Kennedy who casts the final lot in any direction. You got 4 conservatives, 4 liberals on the court, and Kennedy, who I think I may be wrong here. I thought Kennedy was a conservative, but votes all over the place. I think that's the way someone described it to me.
I could be wrong, and I'm sure we're going to get letters about this, but I think he was a Reagan appointment.
Reagan appointment.
But as you said, he's the swing vote, and he votes wherever he feels like.
Yeah, he's not bound by the party rules. So and
wish we had more of that.
I know. I wish we had more of that. But until Kennedy and Ginsburg rotate out, I don't know that we'll see a different makeup of the court. And I think that Kennedy is at a place where I could see him coming down and saying, "Now, government, you've overstepped." It's a tough situation, and the only people who really have the standing to bring it are the Guantanamo prisoners, and that's an habeas corpus action, and it's much more complex. And I think that under current Supreme Court case law, they're non-enemy combatants, and so they can be indefinitely detained under the Constitution currently.
Well, hey, we're lawyers. They need representation, and George Clooney's wife can only take so many cases.
That's true, but also I don't really know how much that a former terrorist in Guantanamo for the last 20 years or 10 years can pay you.
So. So you're doing it for the money?
I have to eat, and family has to eat. So let's be honest. There are those cases you have to take because it's the right thing to do, and then sometimes you can't take that case because you got to pay your bills.
Sure. Well,
the unpopular causes. That's what they told us they're called.
Yeah, that's true. Let's hope that it never comes to that.
I agree. So, but let's move on from the White House and the CIA and all the complexities of constitutional law. But before we move on to our next topic, I do want to bring up our weird news for the week, because this story to me was pretty funny. And
what did you see this week?
It's terrible, but it's also a little bit humorous. I have dubbed this segment the lawsuit of the living dead. A gentleman from Romania, his name is Constantin Relu, learned in January that he was dead. He had been in Turkey for about 20 years as a chef or cook, and returned home after Turkey found out that its visa papers had expired. When he arrived back in his native land, the Border Patrol notified him that he was no longer alive and that his wife had filed for a death certificate in 2016. So they measured his face and compared it to his passport and confirmed that he was, in fact, who he said he was. But unfortunately, the bureaucrats in the capital did not agree, and he has been denied his existence because he filed his objection too late to the issuance of the death certificate. So he got ruled dead on procedural grounds.
Right. In absentia.
And he cannot work. He cannot sign up for any type of Social Security or benefits or anything like that. And he can't go back to Turkey. So he is a man without a life, without a home, without a land, and with very little recourse, it looks like, because the courts told him that their decision was final. And I don't know anything about the appellate process in Romania.
Oh, wow. So what's he supposed to do?
He doesn't know. And what kind of exacerbates this is he has diabetes. So he needs medication. He needs, stuff to try and take care of himself. He needs income to pay for his medication. So he can't work because he doesn't have a Social Security number anymore, or whatever their analog is. Mm-hmm. But this is a weird story, because this is a situation where the law and bureaucracy stands in the way of reality almost.
Yeah.
This reminds me of the cases we read in family law where someone was not the biological father, but they consented to it. And so at that point, the court said, well, you can't you can't now say you're not the biological father because you already said you were.
Mhm.
You know, even though you're not, you still are.
Right.
And so this is just one of those times where people look at the law and they say, "What is going on? Why
How
is
can
there
you not make
not?
an exception?
Why is there not like a governor or you know some member of their executive branch saying, look, okay, fine, yeah, the law says that we got to do something about this. We there needs to be some type of procedure for fixing a glaring error like that."
Absolutely.
Also, what? How do you have to prove? Don't you have to prove someone's dead to get a death certificate?
Well, I remember reading a case that was based on like an insurance claim for a guy who died in Vietnam, and he had been gone for 10 years and no one had seen him, and that was enough to get the death certificate.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
But this case of the Romanian guy, this reminds me of an episode of the classic sitcom MASH, where this exact scenario happens to the main character, Hawkeye, where a mix-up has the army declare him to be dead. I guess for those who don't know, MASH is a sitcom based on a army hospital in the Korean War.
And real fast, do you know what MASH stands for? Because honestly, I do not know.
Really?
Yeah,
it's Mobile Army Surgical Hospital.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because the hospital they were in could like move to wherever the front was.
I know that my cousin Brandon is going to hate me for asking that question because he's been like a MASH fan since we were children.
Shout out to Brandon.
There you go.
But in this episode, it's the same kind of thing where at first he's like, this is great. I don't have to do duty. I don't have to do anything. This is wonderful. But then like the army notifies his father that he's dead. And so the father freaks out, and then it's payday and he can't get paid because he's dead. And he can't get it worked out because there's some sitcom reason. But it's kind of funny how they say art imitates life, but sometimes life imitates art.
This is true. And if only, the Romanians had watched that episode of MASH, they would know that this is a possible outcome.
Oh, yeah. And they would never want to go to Korea. Or Southern California.
California.
Well, it's amazing how much Southern California looks nothing like Korea.
Yeah, this is very true. So, well, hopefully, Constantine, you get your issue resolved. And hopefully before you actually die, because diabetes, if you don't have that treated, then you're not long for this world. So
maybe he can post up in an airport like the guy from The Terminal.
Wasn't that based off of a real event that was completely different?
It was based on a real event that was similar, where there was a Persian immigrant, and I don't know, it all went south.
Yeah, honestly, some airports I would never want to live in. Lord have mercy.
No, that is definitely true. I'm looking at you, Hartsfield Jackson, Atlanta.
Woo! Call out.
Mm-hmm.
DFW is pretty good. It's a
nice airport. I could do a whole segment on this, so let's save that for later.
Stay tuned for airport reviews. All right. Well, that's the end of our weird news segment.
All right. Well, let's talk social issues.
Yes, let's get down and dirty with what's happening in social politics.
So, something that has been really sending shockwaves throughout the world has been the Me Too, the Time's Up. There has been a wave of famous people being accused of or subsequently exposed as sexual abusers. And something that kind of got me started thinking about this was I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, Friendly Fire. Shout out to you guys. They were talking about the movie Braveheart. And the topic came up, can you still enjoy Braveheart even though we now know that Mel Gibson is a garbage human being? He was revealed through some drunken, I think, voicemails to be a horrible anti-Semite who believes that anyone who does not take Catholic rites is by definition a sinner and just, to be cast into hell. Yeah, exactly. So this is something I wanted to pick your brain on. I think a good example would be what I tease with is House of Cards. House of Cards is a fantastic television drama. It's completely gripping. It's one of my favorite shows, starring Kevin Spacey, who up until about 9 months ago or so was one of my favorite actors. I've enjoyed almost everything he's been in. I've read that Netflix specifically chose him as the star for House of Cards because their algorithms and data to that point indicated that people just loved Kevin Spacey. However, Kevin Spacey has been revealed to be someone who consistently and repeatedly both used his influence to get sexual favors from other people, but also those people included minors at some point.
Mm.
So this complicates things. Can we still enjoy House of Cards as a quality television series while ignoring the misdeeds of Kevin Spacey? So I guess, what are your first impressions?
I can't believe this.
What are Eric's first impressions?
It's not Eric. I'm going to take a second and make sure this volume is turned off because I thought I did that last time. This is actually I think something we need to talk about because I'm a huge fan of like Arrested Development and a huge fan of James Franco. And Jeffrey Tambor and James Franco both have been accused of some sexual stuff during the Me Too movement. And so I've wondered about this because after the reports came out, I watched some James Franco movies. I watched, I think I actually watched Disaster Artist before that had come out, but I really enjoyed Disaster Artist, and it made me actually go watch The Room, which I had never seen before. So this is frustrating because I think you have to get down to the nitty gritty here and realize that number one, this is not a one size fits all category. There's a difference between the conduct of Kevin Spacey and Weinstein versus, what James Franco was accused of, or what Aziz Ansari was accused of, which is an interesting one as well. So I think first of all, you have to look and see what is it they're accused of. If it's like systemic abuse of their authority, 80 women, coming out saying this is the kind of guy he is, it would be really hard to support that person, at least in my mind. If it's a little more tame, and I'm not saying that there's anything like one sexual assault is less worse than 80. You shouldn't be sexual assaulting anyone, but like Aziz Ansari, he had an awkward night with a girl where things went bad, and she kind of framed the situation as he was, using his position to take advantage of her. Mm-hmm. And people kind of came back and were like, well, not really. Like, this is just a bad date. It just went bad at the end. So I think you have to evaluate each one. You can't just sit there and say, oh, someone's been accused of it, I can't watch their stuff anymore. I think you got to do a little investigation and look and see what they're accused of. And
right. For me, it starts with, do I think that was there abuse in the production of this work?
Okay, so your first analysis is what's happening in the show that I'm watching. So, for example, Jeffrey Tambor is in the show Transparent, which is about a transgender parent. And his conduct took place on that show, and he was fired from that show. So you're saying that if you were a fan of Jeffrey Tambor, you couldn't really watch that show and enjoy it anymore, knowing that he did bad things on the set of that show to those people.
Exactly. That really ruins it for me. I think another great example is Cosby. That I could be wrong, and I'm sure I'll get letters for it if I am, but it's my understanding that there were a great many actresses who appeared on the Cosby Show who are now Cosby accusers.
Mm.
And I don't believe that I could put that out of my mind while watching it. And I think Cosby's an example that a little bit in our generation loses its meaning because he was America's dad to the generation before us. There are people who are very, very close to me who just could not wrap their head around the things that Cosby is accused of doing, that they just refused to accept them until the evidence was insurmountable. Basically, until they published that deposition where he admits to what he does.
Mm-hmm.
Up until that point, these people who just grew up loving Cosby, they would not accept that as a possibility until the proof was right in front of them. And uh, I I think, but to get back to where that starts for me is I don't know if I can watch something that I know that there were misdeeds going on to these people. I don't know if I could still watch it.
I feel like also with regards to the latest grouping of artists who are accused of stuff, it's all really raw right now. It's all really fresh. All these accusations came out in the last 2-3 months, 4 months. I'm not quite sure, but it's with at least these guys. This is something that's really fresh and it's just kind of happened. Something that we haven't had an opportunity to see yet is how these individuals change their conduct. If Kevin Spacey, and I'm not specifically saying Kevin Spacey, but if someone like Kevin Spacey, who's got all these accusations, goes into rehab, goes into some type of help, starts, donating to programs, trying to help people in these situations, tries to change and contribute back to society in a way that, shows that he is remorseful for his conduct, does that change anything? At that point, is Hollywood even going to say, well, you know what? Yeah, you were, a terrible person in the aughts and before that, but then when everything came out, you changed your evil ways, and we'll welcome you back into the fold. I would like to see.
So you think you could Mel Gibson?
Well, I don't know. I thought that all the crazy stuff came out after Mel Gibson had already started to descend off the mountain of Hollywood.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that, but no, Mel Gibson is back now. He did Hacksaw Ridge. He was nominated for an Oscar.
Oh.
I guess that was really more last year. He wasn't really a story this year, but I think it was around about 2007. We all decided that Mel Gibson was terrible, but now he's back, and we've all kind of forgotten.
So you're saying that because of our memory of a goldfish in the American society, that there is a way back up the mountain. So
I'd be interested to see. I think that it is possible for some. I think Weinstein is an example of someone who is never coming back.
Yeah, I agree.
I think honestly, he's the poster child.
The fact that there's some minors involved in the Spacey situation also might kind of nix him for everything. Because I mean, what's his name? It's not Phil Spector. That's the guy with the crazy hair, but Polanski. There's all that stuff about underage girls with him, and that has stayed with him as long as I've known the name Polanski. Same with Woody Allen, right? His stuff has stuck with him as well, and he continues to make stuff. I don't know how that's possible.
Exactly. But I think you also make a good point about the passing of time. That there are some artists, or there are some works that all it really needs is time, and people will forget. So under that subject, would you like me to ruin some classical artists and composers for you?
Yes, but I want to use an exemplar first to present this issue. Perfect example of this, Fanta. Okay, and I know it's not an artist, but it does prove this. Fanta was created by the Coca-Cola Company of Germany during World War II. Because the Nazis ran out of Coke formula and they needed something for their soldiers to drink. So they came up with Fantasia, which was like an orange soda. And then after the war, the Coca-Cola Company came back and merged with the American Coca-Cola Company. And they said, we're going to change the name of this because no one likes Germany anymore. So they changed it to Fanta, more Spanish. But I'm just saying, no one knows that story. No one sits there and says, I'm going to drink some of this Nazi orange soda,
Sure, but I mean, it wasn't like they were making the Fanta out of Jews.
That's true.
They just they made do with what they had.
This is true, but I'm just saying, but
people forget. You're right.
People forget where things come from. The Rhodes Scholars. No one remembers that guy Rhodesia was named after cutting everybody's arms off. So.
Yeah, he is a controversial figure.
And started the Rhodes Scholarship, which President Clinton was one of those guys.
Like they've been tearing down his statues in Africa in the last few years,
Good for them. Tear
uh,
down tyrants.
but to talk about some of our favorite artists of the past, I think one example that is the go-to example here is usually Wagner, the German composer.
Yeah,
He was a famous anti-Semite. In fact, he said at one point that Jews were incapable of creating art.
which is a huge plot point. Not the Jews
Yeah,
not making art, but him being an anti-Semite's a huge plot point in Curb Your Enthusiasm when Larry David
right.
plays it for his Jewish friends.
So if Jews cannot create art, clearly he was born before he was able to meet Mark Chagall or the Beastie Boys,
Or Seth
uh,
Rogen.
Seth Rogen, Gal Gadot, maybe.
Yeah.
I maybe try to pull that one out. How about Edouard Degas, famous Spanish painter?
I
He was
don't know
another.
this name. I'll be honest. I don't know what kind of art he drew. Was it like the surrealist Hispanic art?
No, he was a little bit before that. He
Okay.
was. You might the one painting of his that you might know is that one of like the people being executed by the firing squad, and there's that one guy with his arms out.
Okay.
It's
I
called
don't
like the
know
Fifth
that,
of
but
May or something like
it
that.
seems
I think
really
if you saw it, you recognize it. But anyway, famous Spanish painter, another anti-Semite. He defended the French court that falsely convicted Dreyfus in the Dreyfus affair. Uh, Pablo Picasso drove two women to suicide. People don't really talk about that.
No, they don't. Didn't he
Cara,
also steal like all of his art? Like, isn't like his most famous quote that a good artist creates and a great artist steals?
yeah, I think he said that. I guess I don't really have any thoughts on whether or not he was stealing things. That's not something I really had thought about.
Well, I
No.
just saying if someone's saying that, then I would assume that they got sticky fingers.
Yeah, well, Lord Byron, the poet, he married his half sister.
Yeah, that's incestuous.
Flaubert, author of Madame Bovary, he was caught paying for sex with children.
And then what's his name? Lewis Carroll, the guy who wrote Alice in Wonderland. Didn't he like they find like a photo album, a bunch of underage girls in it? Like,
Yeah, even back then, he was heavily suspected of being a pedophile.
yeah. So
Yeah. Apparently, Ernest Hemingway screwed up his own children so badly that his oldest son was a raging alcoholic who died in jail.
yeah, but Ernest Hemingway was a raging alcoholic. That might have just been genetics.
That's true. Dickens grew tired of his wife after 10 pregnancies and banished her from the home, falsely claiming in his own magazine that she was a neglectful mother and her children resented her. He shipped his 16-year-old son off to Australia just because he didn't like him, and he never saw him again.
Man,
But we love Dickens.
we love Dickens.
So I think one of the things that can help is the passage of time. I'm not sure whether or not that should help, but it does. I think another thing that this brings up is sort of my second element to look at in this discussion, which is, does the work itself promote any sort of indiscretions or bad behaviors? Like they say Wagner, for example, he was a horrible anti-Semite, but is listening to his music going to make you hate people? I really don't think so, especially if you don't speak German.
It's true.
So I think that's something you have to look at. And lastly, maybe I'm thinking about this too much, but I don't want to continue to enrich those who have acted badly. I don't want to watch the Cosby Show and then have Cosby get royalties from that because he's been revealed to be a terrible person. So I think that maybe to go back to those old artists is that those are all in the public domain now. So, there's not going to be any money flowing to any bad actors at this point.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. Well, at the same time, though, I feel like Hollywood has a very much, you're only as good as your last project mentality. So it's kind of like Mel Gibson. If you can bring another project to the table, we'll forget about what you've done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think we need some time here. We need some time to see how this develops. How does this shift the industry? The people who are accused, how are you going to respond? How are you going to address it? Out of all the people, I think Morgan Spurlock, the guy that did the Super Size Me, kind of the documentarian guy, he like came out and told on himself. He was like, look, I'm part of the problem. I've done stuff and I shouldn't have done it, and I didn't read signals right. I mean, I'm part of the problem. And so is he going to get shunned now because he came out and told on himself? I feel like by the fact that he didn't wait till someone accused him, the fact that he came out and was like, hey, look, this is all on me. I did this. I'm part of the problem. Should he be penalized? Should he be like,
does that make it any better?
It doesn't make it any better, but I think it shows remorse as opposed to someone who has to be dragged kicking and screaming to the, courthouse just to be proven that they've done something. Hello, President Trump. I think that we want people to be able to identify in themselves flaws enough to where they want to change it, right? That's something in our society that when you show remorse, when you show understanding, look at any of the mass murderers that they bring to the courthouse, like the guy from Colorado that shot all those people. What do they all say? He looks remorseless. He has no emotion. He has no type of response to the carnage and death that he has doled out. Why? Why does that matter? Why are people saying that? Well, because when we look at someone and when we do something bad, we feel guilt, right? We feel bad about what we've done. It should change you, right? I feel like the fact that Morgan Spurlock came forward and said something and said, look, I'm going to do something different. At least I'm willing to say, okay, Morgan, you tattled on yourself. You said you're going to change that. If you come out with something, I'll give it a shot. At least I think that that's something that people should consider.
Well, to use our favorite kind of metaphor, which is a legal metaphor.
Yeah.
Is there parole from the court of public opinion?
It's a good point.
And in the examples of these current people being revealed, should there be? Should these people be given second chances?
And like I said, I think it goes back to what their conduct is afterwards. I feel like, coming forward saying, look, I've been this person and I'm going to change. That's definitely a step in the right direction. But I think like, what did Kevin Spacey do? Like when the accusations were coming out, he came out of the closet or something. Like, yeah, and there was a huge hoopla about that. I remember because people were like, it's distracting from the issue and all this stuff. I don't keep up with it enough to know, but I think you said something about it. Do you remember what happened?
Yeah, it was the news started to break about him, and he just was almost immediately like, hey, I'm gay. And it was one of those things where everybody in Hollywood already knew it, just nobody really talked about it.
Yeah.
And people just immediately called him out for trying to distract from the issue. And he hasn't gotten away with it because really up until that, people kind of forget up until that point, it was almost like every time somebody came out of the closet that we threw a national party for them and wanted to celebrate how great it was that they were able to tell us about it. And it really felt like he was trying to capitalize on that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So, and I think that his reaction kind of tanked him even further, right?
Absolutely.
So definitely your conduct matters after the event, after the accusation.
Well, to talk about second chances like that, are you familiar with Michael Vick?
The dogfighting guy.
Yeah, the dogfighting quarterback. Well, what happened with him is he got caught dogfighting. He went to prison. He, obviously was not able to play in the NFL and make the millions of dollars like he was for a couple years. Then he got out, and he made his amends with society. From what I understand, he is active in dog rescue groups and efforts to end things like dog fighting. He spends his off time traveling the country and speaking to young men and encouraging them into things like education and athletics rather than things like gang violence that lead to problems like dog fighting.
As long as it's not court ordered, then I think that's all evidence of change, from Michael Vick. I think that does show that he has taken steps to change his conduct, his attitude, his mentality, his demeanor, and influence those around him. So that's exactly what I'm talking about, is that if these guys who are accused of, sexually taking advantage of other people in the industry, they need to, the mea culpa, they need to do something. They need to start And I'm not saying that this absolves them of that. It's not like, a tit for tat, I get to sexually assault someone as long as I'm mea culpa. But at least with these who are coming out in this wave of accusations, if it's true, you need to do something.
And
Now with the Aziz Ansari thing, I think we have to take everything with a grain of salt to an extent. We have to remember this is the court of public opinion, not the court of law. And the reason why these are coming out in the court of public opinion is because the statute of limitations has run on most of these. So really, on a lot of these accusations, the only recourse that some of these women may have is the court of public opinion.
Right, and I'm glad you bring up Aziz Ansari, because I was a little bit happy to see that there was only so much that the public could take.
Yeah.
That it wasn't maybe it's too soon to say, but that was the moment where I felt like maybe this isn't a witch hunt, because we were actually able to step back and say, wait a second, read what this woman has to say, and what she has to say really isn't all that bad.
Well, yeah, and it's why we have standards. This is a big problem here, is that because no one has talked about this, because this has just kind of been going on in secret, quote unquote, I feel like people don't know what is and isn't necessarily like crossing the line in the Me Too movement. Like the Aziz Ansari thing. These are nebulous things. These are fluid relationships. These are things that are happening. Just because a date goes bad doesn't mean that it's sexual assault. That's true. And also, what's his name? Who's the guy that played Gandalf? Ian something. I can't
Ian
remember.
McKellen?
Ian McKellen. He got a bunch of crap recently because he made a point. He says, I think it's terrible what these men have done, but let's not forget the women who chose to sleep with them to get better roles, positions, jobs. And it wasn't because of the men's coercion or, intimidating them into it. The women sought it out. And, he kind of got crapped on for saying that. He's been in the industry for a long time. I mean, that's a trope, right? That's like a trope about Hollywood, that there are those kind of people out there, whether they be male or female. When we have a second podcast where we talk about shows, we even talked about that in Party Down, how one of the characters was willing to do anything to get the role. So we have to remember that this is not just one-sided. This is not just black and white, that each one of these accusations are different. They have different facts. They have different timelines. They have different people. You can't one size fits all this.
Right. Maybe it was just the way that you characterized Ian McKellen's comments that I don't want to get too victim blamey.
I'm not victim blaming, but I'm not even saying that I agree with him. I'm just pointing out that he made a statement that, hey, just as much as there are men who take advantage of women, there are women who do take advantage of men. I'm not necessarily saying that that's sexual assault, but if someone goes out there actively trying to sleep with someone to get a job and then they don't get the job, can they claim under the Me Too movement that I was taken advantage of?
Okay, I think I see what you're saying. I think that is definitely something that we need to guard against, and that I hope people understand that any fake or any false accusations undermines the real ones and are completely counterproductive.
And I'm not saying that there are like just a slew of fake ones. Right. I'm not undermining anything that's happening, but the Aziz Ansari event does show us, hey, these aren't hard definitions. These aren't black and white, lines that people are talking about. Some of this is a little bit more gray, and she felt at the end of the day, someone told her, hey, that's sexual assault. And then everyone else was like, no, that's not.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just saying, we don't have a jury. We don't have a judge. There's no like black and white standard that we can lay the conduct over. That's the reason why we have the courts. We are in the court of public opinion, and there's no statute of limitations on anything. Mm-hmm. So does someone get to ruin someone's career just on accusation? I mean, that's something we need to ask ourselves. Is that okay? Because what happens if Aziz Ansari got this accusation and he was working on a new movie or show and he got fired?
Right. I think we need to stress that it's important that those who have been the victims of harassment and assault, it's very important that they are given an environment where they are able to speak those concerns and the truth can come out.
Absolutely.
However, we do need to recognize that there does have to be some scrutiny against those accusations.
Well, and that's why we want people, and I know this is tough. I know that this is something that is tough to do because I've talked to people about this, is we want you to come forward and say, hey, this happened when it was fresh. I was assaulted. Give the police an opportunity to bring this guy in. That's why the law's here, is to protect us, to protect you from predators. So, this is something we need to change in our society. Is women are afraid to come to the police. Women are afraid to come and speak out about what's happening, whether that's because of losing their job, whether it's because of being labeled as something in our society. That is something we have to address. We have to encourage people that if you are assaulted in any capacity, notify the police. Get an attorney, contact somebody. And I think that this is part of the thing that the Me Too movement has increased, is it has encouraged young women everywhere to come forward and say something. And that's the best time to do it, is as soon after as possible, because the evidence is fresh, right? The police can actually catch somebody.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But, I think we have to ask this next question. After this Me Too movement, if people continue to not say anything for 10, 15 years after something has happened, what happens then?
I think first we have to acknowledge that there are legitimate reasons why a person would wait that long.
Yes, no, and that was my whole setup here, is that this is,
But you're right. Once the statute of limitations have run, what now?
Because I know with any other type of claim, if you hit me with a car and I file a lawsuit on day 2, year 2, day 1, I've missed the statute of limitations, and it's like, hey, tough shit. You lost.
Mm-hmm.
The law has some deadlines in it, and that's something we have to ask ourselves as a society. Where do we change that? Do we need to remove the statute of limitations for sexual assault? I mean, we kind of want finality in our society. How do we encourage women to come forward? How do we change that mindset in our country?
You know what? I think that's a topic for another day, and I think we've gotten a little deep in here. So, what do you think of lighting it up a little bit?
Okay, well, one final thought. I just want to say this, because this is a sensitive topic, and I don't want anybody to think that I am victim blaming or anything like that. When it comes to
I
this,
apologize for that. I didn't mean to imply that that's what you're doing.
Oh, I don't think you were, but I do want to be clear, is that the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I've heard people say, hey, the Sixth Amendment says that you get a right to face your accuser, but it's too tough for someone who's been assaulted to face the person who's assaulted them. And I understand that argument. I understand that it is tough. I understand that it is something that is probably emotionally just burdensome. But understand that this is something that is a part of the foundation of our system, that person has the right to see you face to face when you accuse them. Why? Because we found that when people won't face the person face to face, sometimes they lie. It's a lot easier to lie about someone when they're not in the room than when they're sitting there face to face. So it's about getting to the truth, and that's what our system is about. So don't be afraid to face the accuser. Just realize it's the way our system works, and you got to do it. This is how you bring these people to justice.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only reason. That's kind of like a little addendum there on that topic.
All right. Well, let's check the mailbag and see if we have any questions from our listeners.
We're gonna go real lighthearted now.
So we want to remind our listeners that if you want to ask us any questions, any arbitrary and capricious questions that you have, any topic that you like, travel, lifestyle, politics, current events, anything you feel like, give us a shout. So reach out to us. Ways you can contact us. You can email us at arbitrarycapriciouspodcast@gmail.com. You can also tweet at us. We've got a Twitter, which is at ArbCapPodcast. That's ARB. CAP. There you go. ARBCAP. PODCAST. You can also tweet at me personally on my own Twitter. You can find me at JSuasponte. That's JAYSUASPONTE. So let's check the mailbag. What do you think, Aaron?
Well, real fast, I have also failed once again to set up any type of social media to allow you to contact me, so I apologize, and that will be coming in the pending future.
There we go. All right. Well, let's see. We've got one question. We got Jack from Los Angeles asking, Aaron, is a taco a sandwich?
Oh, well, my immediate gut reaction is no. It is not a sandwich. That's because in my mind, sandwich requires bread. And so the fact that the corn tortilla is made from corn, generally, now you know what, this is an interesting question.
But
a soft taco
tortilla
would be flour tortilla. That'd be bread.
Mm.
Oh gosh. Would I consider a pita a sandwich? Yes, I would. So I'm gonna say soft taco, yes. Hard taco, no.
Interesting.
The reason why is because it's basically a really, really big like nacho chip with like filling in it.
See, for me, I would say that I feel like a sandwich is defined by its duality in that there are two slices of bread in the traditional sandwich. So I think I would rule that a pita is not a sandwich, along with a flatbread that wraps around, not a sandwich. So a taco with a single tortilla, I'm going to rule not a sandwich.
Okay. I can follow your logic there. I will say this, that tacos generally break at the curving part for the hard tacos, dividing it into two pieces, creating said duality. Also, not sure that you've ever had a whole Taco Bell taco without it breaking. So,
oh, absolutely not. That's true. And what of the Subway sandwich? They don't cut all the way through the bread.
I know they don't. It's basically a taco.
You know what? That's a good point. So, therefore, Subway does not sell sandwiches.
That's right. Subway doesn't sell sandwiches, and tacos are not sandwiches either.
Take that, America.
Yeah, go to Quiznos. Actually, don't. No one likes Quiznos.
I mean, not to maybe alienate some of our potential future sponsors.
I mean, I'll eat Quiznos if they want to sponsor us, but I ain't gonna like tell them that I like them until then.
You know what? I'm gonna tell them right now. I love Jersey Mike's. They have taken over my sandwich heart.
Thank you for telling Quiznos that you love Jersey Mike's.
No, I used to love Quiznos. No, but you know what? Fun fact about me: my handle back in the day used to be Quiznos Guy.
Really?
That was me.
Were you trying to be the next Jared? I mean, you're not fat, man. You can't lose weight if you don't have any.
No, I loved Quiznos. It was my favorite place to eat. I saved it for a Friday every week in high school.
Okay, then tell me this, because if you're that kind of guy at a restaurant, then you got your regular. What was your regular?
Classic Italian. I'd go back and forth between that and the turkey bacon guacamole, but probably about 75% of the time is the classic Italian. Large, on white, extra sauce, no onions.
The only thing about Quiznos that I always liked is they had horseradish. And no other sandwich place that I've ever been to has horseradish sauce. And for some reason, I really like horseradish sauce.
Do you like roast beef?
I do.
I mean, that's what it's for. If you can't have roast beef without the horseradish.
I am unaware of this tradition.
Really?
Yeah.
Have you ever been to Arby's before?
Yeah, I've been to Arby's and it's got a bunch of cheese on it. It's like
horsey sauces.
But that doesn't come on the sandwich. That's like on the side. That's an optional thing.
It's available.
Available is not a tradition. It's an option.
Oh, okay. But yeah, a roast beef sandwich comes with horseradish. That's traditional.
That's interesting. No, I'm curious about this because I love horseradish. Like it's one of my favorite things to add to sandwiches and stuff like that. And just that kick in the face.
Oh yeah. I'm a horseradish fan myself.
Do you know that that's what most wasabi is made from?
Yeah, isn't that a shame?
It is a shame because, I mean, it's horseradish. It feels a little less Asian than it should.
Yeah, the first time I ever had real wasabi, I wasn't expecting it, and I put my normal amount on the little piece of sushi, and I put it in my mouth, and I almost died. Eric was laughing his ass off, and
it's got some more strength to it, and it's also fibrous, which like most wasabi made from horseradish is basically like green paste.
Yeah, because I think for the real stuff, it's got to be graded like
Mhm.
practically table side. Like you got to serve it within an hour.
Well, it loses flavor within 15 minutes of being prepared.
15 minutes. Wow.
Yeah, so that's why they don't use it at most places in America.
Hmm. And I hear that the climate for it, it's kind of like the plant that you make tequila out of, the blue agave.
Yeah.
The climate is so specific that there are only a few spots on this earth where it can be cultivated. And up until recently, none of those were in America. They were all in Japan.
I was gonna say, aren't they all on like Mount Fuji, like at a certain height on Mount Fuji?
Yeah, I've read that they're starting to try and grow it in the Pacific Northwest, like in the Cascade Mountains, because they think that there are some analogous regions, kind of like the way that any. Have you ever been to a winery before?
I've been to vineyards.
Yeah, like anytime you go to an effing vineyard, they're always like, "We have the same climate as Bordeaux," and it's like, okay, then everybody does. Shut up. But the concept is kind of the same. You know, everybody's trying to claim that they have the same climate as wherever they make the iconic stuff you're trying to replicate. So I think what I've heard is that because of the efforts to cultivate it here in the U.S., we might start to see more real wasabi come out, and that's something I'd love to
There
see.
are two restaurants in like the suburbs of Dallas that I have been to that have had it,
Mhm.
and I didn't see it for the first like 14 years of eating sushi.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying the fact that now two restaurants are serving it, that I think we're going to start seeing that a lot more.
Hmm. I'll have to ask you off here which those are
I will
because
gladly tell you.
I'm getting a little hungry.
We've been to one together, so.
Oh, all right. Well, that's one down.
Well, okay, so that was our viewer question. So very good, very good. And please do send in some questions if you have any silly, serious, whatever. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, don't be afraid to tweet us.
Very good. Well, that is the end of our episode today. I believe, Jay, you already gave out all of our social media contact information.
Yeah, just to recap, Gmail is arbitrarycapriciouspodcast@gmail.com. Twitter is arbcappodcast.
Very good. So that's it for us. We will see you next week, hopefully on Sunday. Enjoy your wonderful day. Enjoy your wonderful week.
All right, see you guys next week.